No, actually, I think they are. Red. If it turns red, it means it's live. But we asked you to turn it back off again because
Uh, So just so everybody's aware, we're just holding off. Colonel Jordan, who is the chief of enforcement from Fish and Game, is on his way over, as well as the executive director, Scott Mason, who is the administrator in charge of the Fish and Game. They're both on their way here. We're just delaying the hearing until they show up.
Thanks. Yes. Tommy first. Do you have
Another one.
question?
hit the button and it's red, you are now being omitted over the intercom.
All right. I'm Representative Tim Lang. I am calling the meeting to order. I am the chairman of the House Fish and Game Committee. As was just explained to you, as you're speaking, if you would please make sure you hit the button so the red light comes on. That will allow us to make sure that it's being live streamed on YouTube for anybody who wants to listen, and they'll be able to hear your question and hear your speech. So with that, I'm going to introduce up my side of the table. So Catherine, if you want to start, introduce yourself and
My name is Representative Catherine A. Harvey. I'm the ranking Democrat on the Fish and Game Committee. Thank you.
And I am Representative Larry LaFlamme, and this is my third term, my sixth year on the Fish and Game Committee.
My name's Scott Mason. I'm the Executive Director in New Hampshire Fish and Game.
My name's Dave Walsh. I'm the Assistant Chief of Law Enforcement for the Fish and Game Department.
thank you, guys. So if we can go around and introduce each person here and what your background is, so we have an idea what who you are and what you do.
Right. Good morning. Yeah. I am Kwesi Boateng from Ghana, and I am a fisheries scientist. I work with the Ghana National Canoe Fishermen Council, which is the lead stakeholder in the artisanal industry of Ghana. And I also work with the USAID Ghana Fisheries Recovery Activity Project. So I'm only here to acquire some experience, skills, so which can be used to impact the artisanal fisheries positively in Ghana. Thank you.
Bonjour. Bonjour, je m'appelle Brice.
Good morning, my name is Brice.
Je viens de la Côte d'Ivoire, c'est en Afrique de l'Ouest.
I come from the Côte d'Ivoire, which is in West Africa.
Je travaille sur les questions océanologiques, principalement les aires marines protégées.
I work on ocean topic, especially the marine protected areas.
Et aujourd'hui, c'est un plaisir pour nous de vous rencontrer, d'apprendre auprès de vous,
It's a great pleasure to meet you today and to learn from you,
mais aussi de partager avec vous ce que nous savons et ce que nous faisons de bien.
and also to share with you what we know and what we do well.
Merci.
Thank you.
Good morning, members. Thank you very much for hosting us today. And we are really thankful for this presence. So my name is Shamsuddin Abderrahman. I come from Comoros. Comoros is a small country between Madagascar, Seychelles, and Mozambique. And I'm the general manager of the National Fishing Company in Comoros. Top of that, I'm working at the President Office as advisor for the development of Comoros 2030. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. I'm Tommy Mello from Cape Verde. It's an archipelago in West Africa. I am a marine biologist, co-founder and president of the larger NGO for marine conservation in the country. And I am also an entrepreneur in the sustainable seafood industry. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Iliana Silva. I'm also from Cape Verde. I'm a biologist and I work at the National Directorate of Fisheries and Aquaculture, which is the entity responsible for management and define all the politics regarding to fisheries and aquaculture. So thank you.
My name is Prazeres Monteiro, representative of Angola, the head of Customs Tax Police. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nal. I'm the head of policy and partnership at Blue Volunteers Madagascar, which is an international NGO. I am an agricultural engineer, and I continued in policy and science study. My work with the NGO is to rebuild tropical fisheries with coastal communities, and I am happy to participate to this program to learn from here and also to share knowledge with regard to sustainable management of fisheries sectors. Thanks you.
Thank you for those introductions. So I think probably understanding the differential between the two guys on this side of the table and the three of us on this side of the table, I'll ask Representative Harvey, why don't you kind of explain about the laws and how we bring that forward and regulations and how we assign who does what?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Here in the State House, our constituents, the people who voted for us, will often ask us to bring a bill forward that they feel is important for wildlife management here in the state of New Hampshire. The bill first comes to this committee, which is called the Fish and Game Committee, and we invite people to come and testify either for or against that bill. And then we make a decision as to whether we want to go forward with the bill or whether it should just die right here in the committee. If it goes forward, then it goes to everybody that's in the House, all 400 of the people who were elected to be in the House. We say that it's going to the floor. And again, it's debated on the floor, and they make up their mind as to whether it's a good bill or a bill that should be killed right then and there. From there, it is passed over to the other body, which is called the Senate, and the Senate hears the same bill in their committee that corresponds to a fish and game, and again decides if it should come to the floor of the Senate. And if it does come to the floor of the Senate, then they vote. So it's a long process of review, which is good because we don't want to just pass laws willy-nilly. We want to make sure that they really are the best for our state. And so it's a long process. It takes a year. And if it finally passes all of those steps, then the governor has the final say-so, and he can either sign the bill, at which point it becomes law, or he can veto it. So our committee is just the first step of a long journey for any given bill.
Thank you. Representative Laflamme once again. I just wanted you to, the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department rules and regulations, and there are applicable laws as well. The executive director and the Fish and Game Commission are responsible for making various rules and regulations. But I just wanted to impress upon you, this is every year this new book comes out, and this is all the New Hampshire laws and rules and regulations that involve fish and game. So there's a lot more work involved, and we pretty much change something pretty much every year. And like I say, the legislature is responsible for fish and game laws, and under those laws, and I'm trying to segue over to the executive director, we give the executive director the power to make different rules and regulations that may change. We only meet every we have a 2-year session. So rules and regulations, like for example, we don't tell the Fish and Game Department how many of a specific species of fish someone can possess. The Fish and Game Department and the executive director takes care of those various rules and regulations. But like I say, the volume is pretty extensive. So thought I'd swing that way.
Thank you, guys. So again, just to kind of reiterate, the idea behind as you drove here, you saw the lines on the road. So the legislature's job is to paint the lines on either side of the road. It's the executive's rules over here to stay between those lines and set the rules. So we say that they have the right to manage, to use the representative's example, fish species and how many you can possess. We don't tell them how much. We just tell them you guys need to regulate it. And then they, in speaking with the biologists, decide what that looks like. And so I'll turn it over to Scott Mason, who's the executive director of the Fish and Game, who again is the person chiefly responsible for the regulatory aspect versus the legal aspect.
So we have basically two bodies of governing rules. One would be the laws, which is what the legislature passes. We call them RSAs in New Hampshire. And then the second are the rules. And in order for me to write a rule, or for, well, almost all the rules come out of the executive director's office. For me to write a rule, I need to have the authority from the legislature to write a rule on that particular subject matter. And then we go through a hearing process, so that we can get input from different stakeholders out there. So, for example, this year, one of our commercial fishermen's, it's a co-op down on our seacoast, wanted to institute tuna tournaments. And under New Hampshire law, we have a very expensive permit for a person from a different state to land a tuna in New Hampshire. So they've asked for a reduced rate if that person is involved in their tuna tournament. It doesn't impact the resource, so for us, it's not a problem, but now we've got to go through the process. This particular process is probably going to come back to the legislature first to authorize a tuna tournament license, or request for a tuna tournament license, and then we'll go then we'll go through the rulemaking process at GELCAR, which is a different committee at the legislature to approve the process. So the idea comes up, we'll hold hearings on it, and then we'll write the rules based off of what we're hearing, feedback from I'm sorry, we'll start with a written suggested rule, and then after the hearings, we will tweak that rule before we go through the final process based off of testimony.
And as you can imagine, our role in the law enforcement division is to enforce the laws and the administrative rules that are created. In the United States, New Hampshire and the United States, the first 3 miles out in the ocean are state waters, so the state laws and the rules would apply. When you go beyond 3 miles, it's federal waters. Those laws and rules are created by the National Marine Fisheries Service. However, they don't really have much of an enforcement arm, so they deputize us, and we also enforce those laws. So we're authorized to do both. It's probably a little different than what you have, because each country probably has their own waters, I imagine, so it's a little bit different. But the National Marine Fisheries Service will create the laws for all of the federal waters in the United States, and then it's our job to help them enforce that beyond the 3 miles.
Thank you. And Major, do you have in your department, you have coastal waters enforcement officers as well as inland enforcement officers for lakes as compared to the ocean?
So good question. We have a total of 44 officers. We have 4 assigned to our seacoast. Our seacoast in New Hampshire is very small. It's 18 miles long. So we have 4 officers, but because, especially during seasons when the commercial fishing is very busy, we will also bring officers from all over the state. They're all required to know the laws and to be familiar with the coastal laws. So we'll ship them down there for a day or multiple days to help those 4 officers patrol. We have a lot of lobstering going on as well as commercial fishing. So sometimes we need more officers down there than what's assigned to that area.
Thank you, Major. So I guess at this point, we'll open it up for questions and discussion. Again, I tried to give an outline of the regulatory bodies, the legal law bodies, and how they work together. Probably most of your questions may be directed towards the major over there about the enforcement process of what goes on. So let's have a conversation.
Okay. Tommy?
Thank you, Nali. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your timing. It is really amazing to find some time in your agendas to give us this chance to make some questions and to try to make some conversation. I just want to know that in Cape Verde, we have a fisher agreement with Europe, for example, that we are facing for the last 15 years. And to have an idea, they give us $1 million for a year to have license for 35 giant fishing vessels. So it's nothing. So we have been discussing, for example, the Cape Verde, for the 3rd consecutive year, we have the world record for black swordfish. It animals between 10 to 1,200 pounds. So and we have the record for the last 3 years. So imagine if Cape Verde can just direct some motivation, I said, to develop this kind of big game fishing. We have 12 vessels of big game fishing just in Cape Verde. If you want to make an appointment, it takes you 6 months because they are really completely full, of course. So in my view, if the government promote this kind of fishery, that it's more or like sustainable because it's catch release, then I quite believe we will get more money from this sustainable activity than to make fishery agreements that is just depleting our waters in change of coins. Okay, so for you, it really helpful if I can get for your side some numbers. Here in New Hampshire, how much money you get it with the fishing games? Because we have here a representative of the government of Cape Verde, and me and her, we can bring these numbers to Cape Verde just to show that it's a huge possibility to have more profitable and sustainable activity than to keep going with the fishery agreements, for example, with the Europe. Thank you.
When you ask about numbers, how much money the federal government gives us for enforcement, or how much is in the economy for fishing?
Yes, the profit pool, yeah.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to share what we do have. I think, let me back up just one step. All of our inland water fishing is sport fishing. We have no commercial fishing on inland waters in New Hampshire. We do have commercial fishing on our seacoast. The number one species, dollar-wise, is lobster fishing. We have, over time, we used to have a lot more commercial fin fishermen that we don't have as many as what historically we used to have. So those numbers have dwindled. Not so much from well, two things. Number one is from the changes in regulations that have come through for trying to improve sustainability of the resource, but also just the economics impact of commercial fishing. The sport fishing, the inland fisheries, I believe that's over 180 million a year is the total economic impact of New Hampshire's economy. on an annual basis. We sell about $6 million in sport licenses, but that would include people coming to the state, hotels, restaurants, buying equipment, paying for guides, in case what you're talking about, hiring the boat, that kind of stuff. I don't have a specific number for our sport marine fishing. But going back to that tuna tournament that I was talking about, I do know, talking with them, they have 70 boats lined up to compete in that this summer. Yeah. So it is a big, and that's kind of, I think, would be our equivalent to what you're talking about, would be sport fishing for tuna here would be, you're trying to develop a sport fishing for, I apologize, was it marlin, black marlin? Yeah. Okay.
So I just looked real quick, on the commercial side of things, New Hampshire's economy, the commercial species, the economic value is about 17 million, and 70% of that is made up of lobsters. But from the sport fish side, I don't know those numbers, so.
Thank you. I think you had a question as well.
Yeah, thank you. I just note the question, so like a chair of a question. So please right now.
Ok, merci.
Thank you.
Ok, ma question va à l'endroit de Madame Harvey.
So my question is for Representative Harvey.
Les consultations que vous faites avec les peuples, les populations concernant chaque projet de loi,
So each time you have a hearing with the public to discuss the bills, to be able to discuss the different bills,
se passent seulement ici ou bien il y a des comités qui se retrouvent dans des villes que vous parcourez pour recueillir leurs avis?
does it only take place here, or do you go to different towns and cities throughout the state to hear what other people have to say?
Et comment vous aidez la police et le directeur de la pêche à lutter contre la pêche illégale dans vos zones?
And
Merci.
how do you help the executive director and the police to fight against illegal fishing in your area?
Merci.
So yes, the hearings are all held here. In fact, this is the exact room that they're held in. We don't go around the state to hear people's opinions. They either come to us in person, they can email us testimony, written testimony if they can't get here and so forth, but this is where it's held. I will say during COVID, we did have Zoom participation, but now that COVID is on the decline, that's not an option. They're all in person. As to how we help the law enforcement, we don't really, we're not really in charge of law enforcement. Ours is to pass the bills that allow the law enforcement to do what they need to do. So we don't take part in the actual law enforcement in and of itself. Now, we could, if law enforcement felt that they were not able to do their job because of a certain bill, or they needed a bill clarified, or they needed something else added to our book there, then they could certainly approach a representative to introduce that bill, and that would help them to do their job. But we don't physically go out and do any law enforcement ourselves. I'm sure as private citizens, if we hear of an act that is taking place that goes against our RSAs, we could report it. I personally have reported deer that have been poached to Fish and Game and so forth, and they have investigated that. But that's just me doing it personally. It's not me doing it as a member of Fish and Game Committee or as a legislature. I just knew that something happened in my community that was wrong, and I took it upon myself to report it. So.
So just so we're clear, they're generally, as a state representative or a state senator, there are two ways a bill generally comes to us, and a bill is just a request for a change in law. It could be because the law was written 50 years ago and needs updating, or it could be because so for various reasons. So generally, we have citizens that'll bring us bills and say, "Hey, I tried to do this and I was told no." And so we research that. We decide whether or not we think that's worthy of a change in law, and then we'll again submit a bill or request for a law, and then we hold public hearings on that. The other way, and the more common way we get bills, is from the agency in and of itself. So again, the agency recognizes there's an outdated law or a law that needs changes in order to help them with enforcement. And so they'll submit a request to us, to one of the committee members or any state representative, and say, hey, this current law is hindering us from doing this. And if the committee member feels it's appropriate, then we will submit a bill and have a public hearing on that change in law that'll allow them to further enforce. And there's three steps basically in our bill process. The House of Representatives, which is the ones they call the lower house, first has a hearing here. And then if we pass it, we decide it's a good idea and we pass it, it goes over to what's called the Senate. And the Senate will then hear the bill. If they think it's a good law, they'll pass it. Then it goes to the governor of our state, who then will sign it into law, and then will allow the executive branch agency, the Fish and Game Division, to be able to act on that law, change the rules and regulations. So just understand there's a public side where the civilians can ask us for law changes, and it's not uncommon for the agency, the enforcement agency, to ask us for a change in law as well, because they can't act. And it may be something about a species that's changed, and so therefore we need a law change. It could be just, again, a modernization of an old law that they're looking for. Further questions?
We had the opportunity shortly after I came into office to modify a law that was set in 97? The bear damage? Yeah, so we actually got to change a law that was written in the the late 1890s. So that's been around for a long time, and it somewhere along the line it was no longer being enforced the way that it was written in the law book. So when we took a closer look at it, they put it into a bill and changed the law.
Yeah, thanks for Kim. So for the question, me, Shushi, Samsudin, and them, Ilyana. My question is with regard to this consultation. Who is involved in this consultation? Does it require, as it is a law in link with natural resource management, does it require the involvement of university or researcher before it is before it will be presented to our representative? And once accepted, who decided and how those law will be funded for their enforcement on the ground? Yeah, thank you.
We only brought one of our divisions today, which is our law enforcement division, but we do have marine biologists, a marine division. We have an inland fisheries division with biologists, and we also have a wildlife division with biologists, and then a subsection of the wildlife division. It splits into two directions, one being game animals we hunt, and then the other one being non-game animals that we don't hunt and eat. So we have our internal biologists within the department themselves that do research, monitor other research that's going on. Obviously, a research project in Vermont is going to end up with fairly similar results to one in New Hampshire, so our neighboring state. So the research would probably be fairly similar. The animals are traveling back and forth across state lines all the time. And the fisheries are fairly similar. and then the third structure you talked about is our university system, and we do quite often we cooperate with the university on a research project. For example, we're changing our method of monitoring fur bearers. We've always looked at to try to decide what the current population of fur bearers are. We've always looked at the trapper effort take fur bearers. Fur- yeah. Sorry. So like mink, muskrats, those things that you'd turn into a fox or whatnot. So traditionally, what we had done is we had done surveys of our trappers, taking the hours that they were trapping versus what their take was to come up with and use that ratio to try to predict what the population of the wild animal is in the field. Well, recently we've started a program with the University of New Hampshire where we're doing research on what they call camera traps, using game cameras, and then a statistical analysis of putting these cameras out as randomly as possible, and then coming back and trying to make predictions off the population. Obviously, this will take multiple years to compare numbers back and forth to try to come up and see if this is a reasonable way to predict the population of the fur bearers.
And during
Yeah.
the
So sorry, just comment. So it is more science-based decision or economic-based decision?
Because like our hunting, all of our hunting and all of our inland fisheries is sport based, so it's recreational based. So it's not the economics that lead the decision. It is the science and the conservation that leads the decision. When we get involved, and we've carried that forth into the commercial activities that go on, which would be trapping, because trappers are allowed to sell the furs, as well as our offshore fishing. Conservation still leads the decision there too. But obviously, you dealing with the folks that are involved in this. Well, let me back up for a minute. I'll give you a little family history. My father was the second warden on the seacoast after we shut down commercial clamming in New Hampshire. So back in the 40s, prior to, I think about 48 is when they shut it down. You had a lot of people on our seacoast that supported their family off of digging clams and then shucking clams and selling canned clams all over the world. And that market got shut down. And for quite a period in the 40s and 50s, that was a very contentious thing. You had these folks that have been involved with it for generations still illegally harvesting clams for sale. So you can go down to Massachusetts and dig clams and sell them. So it's easy to sell the product. And it was a long going fight, an ongoing fight that probably took 10 or 15 years to curb this issue within that group of folks. And obviously, dealing with the economic impacts of conservation, you can't ignore that as you're trying to implement your new policies and trying to work with these people and getting past that and giving them other alternatives for making a living other than the activity that they used to do is a very important part of that. And I don't mean to pick on my major here, but some of the stories my father used to tell, they would be involved in fist fights. My father's been threatened with guns. My father's been threatened with knives over a bucket of clams. So what would that have been back then? Less than $1 worth of clams. So because of that history, they took it very seriously.
So one of the things I will say relative to this conversation is around conservation versus commercialization and that balance. In the case of laws, when we have a public hearing for a law, Citizens are more than welcome to come. We have a gentleman from Guilford who's a retired biologist, and he attends on a regular basis, and he's a conservationist, very much believes in conservation of wildlife. And they're all given equal say to have a conversation. We've had to again, the university system come in and speak at a public hearing on a law change. We have citizens come in for various reasons to come in and speak in favor or opposed to a law change. So it goes through a very deep vetting process in both the House and the Senate. But even with the agency over here on the regulatory side, when they create regulations, before they can change the regulation, they're required also to have a public hearing and to have citizens come in and people who are involved, either the industry or just a private citizen, come in and speak to them about what the impact of that regulatory change is going to mean to them. And then it's their job to balance and weigh that the different versions of what people want and come out with what's best for New Hampshire. Again, I'll say that they generally always lean on the conservation side, which is good to preserve our wildlife and fisheries management, to make sure we have a sustainable program that'll go forward and not just deplete it for the short-term money. So they've done a great job at doing that. Any further questions or comments or conversation that's
Yeah.
going on?
Sushi?
Yes, I am really enjoying the discussions we having. Yeah, but then my simple question is, I want to know if the regulators, they do have fisheries background, either maybe master's degree in fisheries, undergraduate studies, or any kind of, fisheries program. I mean, their background.
Are
Let
you
me come
asking
again.
the background of the biologists,
No, the background of the regulators.
of the regulators?
Exactly. Do they
Oh,
have some kind of fisheries background?
Not necessarily with the law enforcement.
No, not with law enforcement. We are required to have either a degree or experience in law enforcement. It's recommended we have something either fish or wildlife, but it's not a mandatory. But to be a fisheries biologist, they have to have a master's degree in fisheries. To be a wildlife biologist, they have to have a master's degree in biology or wildlife management.
But then it is not a mandatory for the regulators, right?
For enforcement,
No, enforcement and regulators.
or the legislature? No.
Legislature, yeah.
No,
Not
no.
really a mandatory. Okay, and again, I want to know if what approach do you in most cases use? Do you use the top bottom approach or the bottom top approach in trying to execute, some of these your rules?
So if I could, again, a lot of the times our law and our regulatory happens because a citizen bubbled up an issue, right? They had a problem, they saw something they didn't like, or were involved themselves in something. So I'll give you an example. Scott won't like this one, the director, but so this year we had a citizen come forward had a problem with dealing with the agency, and there was no appeals process for the ruling of the agency. And so they brought the bill to me, they brought it to me. And so I put a bill in saying every citizen should have the right to an appeal an administrative decision. If someone makes a ruling, you can't let it just stop there. So we put a bill together, and we should vote on it, and it should become law hopefully soon. And it was just that. It just created an appeals process from a regulatory decision and allow that process to occur, because that was what was in the best interests of the citizen. So there was a case of a bottom-up bubbling up of an issue. So go ahead.
First, thank you. So when you talk about the experience level of either law enforcement or the legislators, we see bills on all kinds of different subjects in the House. Here in the committee, we see fish and game bills, but in the House, we see all kinds of bills. So no, we don't have experience in all of the topics that are brought forward to us. But that's why the hearings in the committee room are so very important, and we really encourage people to come and talk to us because they're the ones that do have the experience. And so we listen not just to citizens, we listen to lobbyists. We encourage people to reach out to us in any way, whether phone calls or whatever. If we're having a particularly contentious bill, one that people feel very strongly about one way or the other, I will get as many as 300 emails a day. So that's and I like that. I do because it tells me what the people are thinking. Otherwise, I would have no idea.
So again, my background's in technology. I'm an IT manager for a living. That's what I do, but I'm the chair of the House Fish and Game Committee. So in the case of going the other direction is one of the things we learned in our hunting season for our recreational hunting. There were some rules that were just problematic. I use the pistol is my favorite one, right? So we had a rule that said that if you were hunting and carrying a handgun, a pistol, for the purposes of self-defense, you could have 6 rounds in the gun. However, if you were hunting with a pistol, you were only allowed to have 5 rounds in the gun. Didn't make sense, right? So this was an agency kind of came to us. We had a conversation and we said, let's make this more uniform, right? And so we set everything at 6, so it was clean. But for some reason, back whenever they said it, that was the way they said it. But we recognized that it created a problem for our law enforcement officers enforcing that, because how do you tell whether the gun on a hip is being used for hunting or being used for protection? So what do you do with that, right? So there was a case where we cleaned law up and made it more uniform to make it easier for citizens to follow the law, not accidentally become criminals.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the members for giving us this time to exchange with you. So my question will go, I would like to know a little more about how is fishing works in your states and what kind of support you are giving to the community. Having said this, because I have been working with fishing communities, and through my companies, I have been provided community buildings and boats and fishing gears and equipments. But at the end, 50% of them they are not happy, and sometimes I had a fighting with them. So I would like to understand how it works. What is the approach you have with your fishing communities in order to get some information to implement to my community? Because I'm working with the 9 communities, village, and the total number is 150 fishermen that I'm working with them. So the boats, the fishing gears, the equipments, the community buildings, was free for them. So it belongs to them from the company. But once they go for fishing, the condition was that once you come from the sea, 60% of the harvest has to be bought by the company for a low price. Then the 40% you can either sell to the company, or you can go to eat on your home, or sell to your communities. But they have never been traceability between them, between we and them. Sometimes they come, they say we didn't catch anything, but back information, we find that they got some catch. So I had facing all these issues. Then I'm very happy to be with you and get some advice regarding this matter. Thank you.
We actually don't get involved in that part of it as far as the business side of the commercial fishing. we just enforce the rules like on a lobster, you know, the lobster has to be, the body of the lobster has to be so long before you can keep it. So we will go on the boats, making sure that the catch is legal, that kind of activity. In general, I would dare say that most of our fishermen are small independent businessmen themselves. They've bought the boat themselves. The docks tend to be municipal owned. Would that be right? Correct. So they're owned by the local town there. Sometimes, like in Seabrook, that dock or that pier is owned by the town, but it's rented to a local fisherman's co-op. So they come together as these small independent businessmen come together into a co-op, and they manage that dock. They manage the facilities there. As things have progressed in the marketing, they've actually developed a local retail market. So the co-op supplies the dock. As a member, you kind of pay in and buy into the ownership of that. But they supply the dock. They also supply marketing for your catch. But you, as a member of the co-op, you don't have to sell your catch to them. You can, you know, I was talking to a gentleman the other day. He loads his catch, you know, every time he comes in, he loads it on a truck and takes it to Massachusetts and sells it down there because he doesn't believe he can get a good price in New Hampshire. So that type of activity happens, but it's a little different as far as how we manage our interaction with the fishermen. We don't actually manage the economic side of it.
And I would just add to that, the director talked about how they're independent businessmen, each boat, and if there's a problem with somebody committing a violation on the commercial side of things, the other fishermen view that as they're stealing from them. So we're the last person to find out about it. They kind of take care of things on their own, and when they can't do that, that's when they come to us. It is not unusual. Well, it is unusual, but it's not unheard of for a boat to burn over the night. And that usually is someone that has been stealing lobsters or committing lobster violations. And some fisherman was fed up with it because he looked at it as they're taking money out of his pocket. So usually we're the last ones that they complain to. They try to take care of things on their own because they're losing money as well. So.
So I will also say that there's, in the United States, with multiple states that we have on the Atlantic seaboard, there is a group called, and Scott, you can help me with this. It's the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which helps set catch limits, if I'm not mistaken, for the region. So we help report the catch, you know, the cooperatives that they were talking about, private industry reports back to the state, and this helps us maintain sustainability across the entire eastern seaboard to make sure that New Hampshire isn't, you know, just going to be a black hole, no fish, right? So again, we participate in regional cooperatives, regional commissions that help set catch limits, and then it's a self-reporting for the various fish cooperatives to report back to that regulatory body that'll help maintain. So if we overcatch or lobster, we'll use a good example, they may pull back and say, okay, once you reach this limit, you got to stop catching lobster. And so they'll help maintain sustainability in the industry so it's not burned out.
Each state has its own quota. So what happens sometimes, if it's a fish that's not something that our fishermen aren't catching, we will trade quotas off with other states to make sure that we, you know, our fishermen do get the best ability to, you know, make a living without harming the resource. So.
Hello, Iliana from Cabo Verde. Okay, thank you. Like Tommy said, we can promote the fishing games back home, and I truly believe that we have all the conditions to do that. So I want to know how do you start the big games here in New Hampshire, and what were the steps you took to be where you are now? Thank you.
Can you repeat the beginning of that question? I apologize. I'm a little hard of hearing too, so.
No, I said that back in home in Cabo Verde, we can promote fishing games, and I think we have all the conditions to do that. So my question is to know how do you start the fishing games here? Uh, what
talking about games?
fishing games?
Games?
I think the executive branch is supposed to stop fishing game.
You're talking about fishing games, like competition.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. No, how do we get people to do sport hunting and fishing instead of
Yes, yes.
commercial hunting and fishing?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, our history, fishing game, we just celebrated 150 years in New Hampshire. So our agency started over 150 years ago. What happened is our resources, our rivers used to run black with salmon, for example, coming up the rivers to spawn. And they were commercially harvested to the point where we've lost that resource, as well as impacts to the habitat. Dams were built on these rivers, environmental impacts, pollution to the rivers and whatnot like that. So we lost our resources on like fisheries, hunting, partially due a combination of overhunting, because you used to have market hunting. We used to be able to go shoot ducks and sell ducks that you shot. Our forest industry, in the old days, you would have men go back into the woods and live at lumber camp, and they would live up there all winter. The trees were cut in the winter. They were sent to the rivers and swished down to sawmills further downstate. And those camps were fed with venison, fed with moose, and some of those species we had some issues with. So by the time we got involved, it was actually to save some of these species. So there were very few deer left in the state of New Hampshire when fishing game became involved in it. So that was one of our early steps, were to shut down the sale of wildlife, other than, as I say, fur bearers and some of the commercial saltwater fishing. I would dare say we probably waited too long, and it's a combination of hunting pressure, fishing pressure, as well as habitat pressure, environmental pressure on the habitat, and we waited too long to make some changes. It took a long time. New Hampshire, you look around today and you see trees everywhere. Well, if you were here in the 1820s, you wouldn't see hardly a tree. This was, we used to grow all of our own food here. And then as the West opened up, people moved out west. So those farms, some of the farms were kept in production. Sheep, we had the Amoskeag woolen mills, down in Manchester. And those are the largest, at the time, they were the largest woolen mills in the world. So when you looked around New Hampshire, you used to see nothing but sheep. They were everywhere. And as time went on, these markets changed, and that land stopped being farmed and started growing back up. And that was partially what happened to return some of our wildlife species that had been here back in the 1700s or the 1600s when folks first got here. And that's been, that plus the work we do, I think has led to a major change in what we now see. I grew up, probably about 10 miles from here as a kid. We never saw a black bear in town. My whole, until I was in college, never saw a black bear in town. Now it's pretty regularly that they see black bears down here. Same with moose. We didn't used to see moose in southern New Hampshire. Now it's starting to go the other way, but now we have moose spread out across the state. As far as how to make those changes, I go back to my father's stories that he told me when I was a child. I think part of it is you've got to give these folks an opportunity to do something else, another economic pathway to their own personal success, because at the end of the day, they're just trying to feed their family, and they're doing it through harvesting wild game. So giving them opportunities in life becomes a crucial part of being successful. Being fair with these folks. I think sometimes, we concentrate on the goal, and we can sometimes forget the impact that that goal has on people. And I think, you know, you need to be fair with folks, honest. You need to bring them into the solution. Give them a voice in how the solution will impact them. Right now, we're going through some major changes on the seacoast with our lobster industry. We're trying to protect whales. Right whales seem to have a hard time navigating around lines in the water. So as I assume, lobster traps are sitting on the bottom of the ocean. They're, what do you have, like 10 or 20 of them tied together. And then you have a line going up to a buoy on top at the surface. And sometimes if a whale swims by, they can get tangled in these lines. And with the way the right whale responds when he comes in contact with one of these lines makes them much more susceptible to getting entangled and being hurt. And they are an endangered species. So we're right now going through a process of having breakaway lines so that there's a weak link in that line. So if a whale gets tangled in the line, it'll break away and hopefully save the whale. So these are new regulations. Our lobstermen are concerned about the cost. They're concerned about, you know, having to recover traps after the line gets broken. A bunch of issues, but as I say, working with the lobstermen and trying to get buy-in becomes a very important part of that. Does that answer your question? And then the other part of it is, I think in your case, let us go back to New Hampshire at the turn of the century, in the 1890s, 1880s. You know, is getting tourists to come and hunt and fish and pay for those licenses and pay into the economy to create jobs for some of those folks. So I live at the northern end of the state, and that's kind of where a lot of our guides work out of. So we have quite an economy up there during hunting season where people come and stay. You have restaurants, you have hotels, you have guides that all make a living off of, we use the word sport, but a tourist hunter or angler that comes up that wants to experience this. One of the things we've seen that, I grew up poor. I grew up, not a lot of money, so it never really, I didn't understand it until I had an opportunity to work with one of our Fortune 500 corporations here in the United States. And, you get these executives from these large companies, and they want to experience catching the big fish or catching the big deer or whatever. And they have very limited time to do it, which means they're willing to spend a lot of money for the right people to get them to where they want to go. And in our case here, we deal with tourism from outside of New Hampshire. In your case, you may need to deal with tourists outside of your country, trying to attract folks into the country to come and fish, that kind of stuff. Is that?
So one of the last, I'll say just to tag on to that for the executive director, one of the big things the agency does is education, working with all the different partners, whether it's the general public for the sport fishing and the inland fishing, and working with them. They provide hunter safety and hunter education courses. They work with as you just heard, with the fisheries, dealing with the breakaway lines for the right. So again, it's the cooperative effort between the agency, not using a hammer to force stuff, but doing the soft sell and working with it to find a common ground that works together. On a regular basis for the sports fishing in New Hampshire, we have like open days for fishing where you don't have to own a license. You can just go and fish. So to try to get people interested in doing inland sports fishing without a cost, right? They can just go out on a Saturday afternoon and go fishing, don't not have a license. And if they enjoy it, then they'll go buy a license and they'll do it again, which helps promote the system, helps promote the guides that the executive director was talking about. That's a big piece in New Hampshire because, again, we don't have commercial hunting, for the most part. We have Corbin Park, but I think other than that, we have generally limited commercial hunting, and we don't have any inland commercial fishing except for with guides. And so that's a big aspect of what the executive director was talking about. So promoting those tourism activities, promoting those recreational activities help sustain. They have a pretty large hatchery program to stock our inland fisheries, to stock our lakes and to stock our streams with fish so that when you go out to do recreational fishing, there's actually a fish for you to catch to keep that happening. So again, I think education and sustainability programs that the agency's done has been phenomenal and helped New Hampshire in keeping our program. Scott, if I'm not mistaken, last year was the largest year in record for revenues for the Fish and Game Department.
Could very well be.
Yep. So again, last year, due to the advent of COVID, everybody wanted to be outside. Nobody wanted to be inside, but Fish and Game was able to capitalize on that. And we sold more fishing licenses. We sold more hunting licenses. Outdoor activities were highly promoted because nobody wanted to be inside. So it increased the revenue for the agency. That agency is one of the few agencies in our state that's self-funding. So all the revenue they make, they keep and they use for their own agency. And so it's when we have places like this where we can increase revenue and be self-sustaining, it helps on the tax rate for our local citizens and helps get more people involved in outdoor activities.
Yeah, thank you a lot. We are running out of time, so maybe last question from Montero, and then if you have some question to ask, and thanks, Montero.
Yes, thank you. Well, I would like to know if it's possible to have the penal legislations enforced. The penal legislation. Yeah, that yeah. Yes, but I know that you have different several legislations. I would like to have only the penal legislation that we can find transgressions, that we can find the crimes, if it's possible.
I think the two things you're looking for some of the state regulatory aspect from the agency itself, as well as maybe we can see about getting you guys copies of our state laws. I'll see if I can get those two things put together and sent to you guys. So the major will help us get the information. I'll give it to Anise and she
Okay.
can get it out to you guys.
Okay. Because in Angola, I'm from Angola. Yes, because in Angola, our legislations, some conduct we consider that is crime, and another conduct we consider that is transgressions. Non-transgression on which we apply fines, and on crime is that we can arrest the perpetrators, and in the court judged in accordance of the law. Yes, and I would like to study it, to make a difference, to compare our legislation and your legislations.
In most of ours are violations, which is a fine. Some of the more serious ones are misdemeanors, and there's very few felonies. But I think, and I'm speculating here, in Angola, if you have a large game species that's endangered, that's probably a very serious offense. We don't have nobody can hunt or take an endangered species, and we don't have a lot. So most of our violations occur with game species. So you may be able to shoot a deer, but you can't do it in May, and that would be, a misdemeanor, which they could arrest, but we don't typically see the very large fines and the very large penalties unless it's a repeat offender over and over again. So there are a lot of differences, but I could try to get you some information on that. Yep.
Probably the most serious infraction, or I won't say infraction, but penalty is taking away the license for a period of time. So a lot of times you will, if it's a multiple offender or a serious offense, will take away a person's right to have a hunting license or a fishing license for a period of time, a year, 5 years, to say, you know, we've given you 3 chances and you keep doing the same violation. So now it's just illegal. You can't have a license ever, or for a period of time, I should say.
And that's one of the biggest deterrents with all the fishing game is that if you'll lose your ability to do it. And with the commercial fishing side, if you have so many violations and you lose your commercial license, you lose your livelihood. So it's something they pay attention to.
Okay. Thank you, sir. It's finished. Can we have time? It's done. It's done. Yeah. We are running out of time, so if you have maybe something, one question or a general comment for us, it's nice, and then we can take pictures.
I just wanted to thank you all for coming and participating. I think it was a good exchange of information. And I'm thank the commissioner and the branch and my fellow representatives. I did want to apologize for the Senate. The chairman of the Senate did reach out to me and they were unable to attend to a conflict. But we're very happy to have you guys here. Anise will provide you my contact information as well as everyone who sat here today. So if you have any future questions when you get back home and you're like, oh, what did he say? Or what are we doing here? Feel free to reach out to any one of us. We'll be happy to respond. It's the one thing about New Hampshire is you can get right to the executive director of Fish and Game for the entire state. And he does answer his emails, or at least mine. But I want to thank you. And again, I have the sheet with your contact information on it. And I'll make sure if we have anything we have questions on, we'll reach out to you guys. So thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is an important moment also. This
And with
picture-
that, the hearing is closed.